Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there, and welcome to another episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Dilly Hussain. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find this episode on all 3 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, don't be cheeky. Remember to click subscribe to the Five Pillars YouTube channel. Today's guest is a very interesting one. I believe there's going to be lots to discuss and lots to explore and lots to find out. She is a prominent and veteran campaigner and pro-Palestine activist. She is the co-founder of the direct action network pro-Palestine group, Palestine Action. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Huda Ammori, how are you?
Good to be here.
Have I pronounced the second name properly?
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. What's good?
It's good to be here today on this podcast.
You've had a very busy 6 months.
Yeah.
Since the genocide started.
Yeah. I mean, for us, we were very active for the past 4 years, but obviously it demands a heightened level of attention since October 7th. And obviously there's more and more people joining and wanting to take direct action. So we have been very busy in the past 6 months. And we've had lots of new people joining from different backgrounds from across the country and also internationally. We've launched several different international groups since 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. I think people are now seeing that this is the time for direct action.
I want us to get to know the Huda before Palestine Action.
Yeah.
And I know we spoke about some of this before we pressed record. What's your heritage?
So I am Palestinian on my father's side and Iraqi on my mother's side. So my family, my Palestinian family, my father was forced out when he was 6 years old during 1967, and the Israeli military was shooting at his house, and he was forced to hide under the table and basically crawl out of the back of his own house and run with his brothers and sisters. Eventually they made their way over to Kuwait, and then eventually they made their way over to Iraq, which is where my mother was from. They met, got married, and came over here. And so I've grown up here in England, whereas my older brother, was born in Iraq.
And have you visited either Palestine or Iraq?
So I have been to Iraq quite a few times, and unfortunately I haven't gone back to Palestine. Mainly because of the occupation. My family hasn't been allowed to go back to Palestine since they have left. But inshallah, one day when Palestine is free, I will go back to my homeland.
Inshallah. I asked you before we started filming as well that your father, your grandfather, perhaps even your great-grandfather, people of that generation, the kind of Nakba, post-Nakba generation, and even the kind of like the British Mandate period, they may have had an ideological leaning. It could be Islamic, it could be pan-Arabism, it could be socialism. Did your forefathers in the recent last 100 years, did they lean towards a particular kind of movement, or was it just a case that they were for the resistance or for liberation, irrespective of who it was?
So my family have been very set on supporting the idea of liberation and resistance in order to achieve that liberation, and that has changed through different periods of time in Palestine. But my great-grandfather, he was involved in the uprising in 1936, and this was during the British rule of Palestine. And so he was very active in fighting against the British colonization of that time. And as a result, the British actually assassinated my great-grandfather. They put a ransom on his head and they bombed our family home, which was rebuilt by the Palestinian people. And eventually the Palestinians stole his body back because the colonizers were keeping his body, and they actually have a mosque on top of his grave in Tulkarm. And my grandfather is a Palestinian poet, but many different members of my family have since been involved in some way or another resisting against the occupation. And ultimately, my family was forced out in 1967. And, as with many Palestinians, have been displaced all over the world since then. But on both sides of my family, we are the only ones who went to the West. From my mum's side, who's one of 11, my dad's one of 6, we were the only ones who came to a country like Britain. And I think with that comes a sense of acknowledging that you are privileged to a certain degree, because
Absolutely.
you're not growing up under the fear of imperialism or oppression, and also, you know, a feeling of responsibility, because you are growing up in a country which is responsible for the demise of your homeland and for the occupation, and later on for the occupation and invasion of Iraq, where my mother's family are.
You know, that's an interesting conversation sometimes. You know, it's something which right-wingers always bring up, especially when it comes to Muslims or people of colour, their loyalty and allegiance, right? Irrespective of what number generation you are. You know, you could be 3rd or 4th generation, born and raised here, educated here, contributed here, as our forefathers. But this question of, Yani, how do we perceive Britain, the country of our birth? Obviously, whether you speak of it as a Palestinian Iraqi or as a Bangladeshi, Britain has had a colonial legacy in both those respective lands of our motherland and our heritage. How do you see Britain, the country of your birth?
Well, it's difficult. It's difficult to answer. I mean, in some ways it's simple, because, you know, you can see them as the colonizers of your homeland, the colonizers of Palestine, the ones who continue to support the oppression of Palestinians, the ones who are arming the genocide of Palestinians. And the same when it comes to Iraq. They assisted in killing 1 million Iraqis. They assisted in the destruction of Iraq. At the same time, you know, I grew up in this country. I know my friends are here. Some of my family are here. You know, we have family friends and Palestinians and communities here who are of Arab descent as well. So, you know, at some it's a conflicting position, because in one sense, some of my culture is British. You know, I grew up in this country, but at the same time, you know, knowing that you are a part of a country which is responsible for the demise of your homelands and responsible for the destruction of the Arab world, it gives you a sense of responsibility and duty to change that. Because it's not all British people don't want that, but it's the ones in power, and Zionism is entrenched in this country. And I don't think that's for the benefit of the British people, and it's not for the benefit of anyone apart from the Zionists, to be honest.
I'm glad you took it there. So you make a distinction between the establishment, the echelons of power, the ideologies that underpins their policies, than with the British masses.
Yeah, 100%.
When did you get into activism? When did you start becoming politically active or on causes which can be described as social justice or Islamic or human rights, whatever it may be? When did you start becoming active on these matters?
So growing up in my background, it was pretty standard for us to go to protests. You know, we used to go down to London, go to the big demos and make placards of our family friends. That was normal. So I wouldn't have considered that me being an activist, because that was just normal life for me growing up. I think a turning point for me was in 2015. I went out to Lesbos, which is a Greek island, which is when refugees were coming in. It's the height of what they call...
From Syria.
From Syria, from Iraq.
Iraq as well, yes.
Palestinians as well, many different backgrounds, but this was at the height of what they call the refugee crisis. And I went kind of on a whim. I decided I was going to go, and I went and I fundraised money to help people when I was there. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I was really taken aback, and I think it was a big wake-up call for me, just to quite understand just how lucky I was. Because, you know, you see these refugees coming in, and I didn't see any difference between me, my family, and them. And, you know, after a month, I'd go home with my passport on a flight, and these people were dying to travel. And at the same time, I saw the NGOs, you know, like the UN. You had 3,000 people coming every night. There was probably 20, 30 independent volunteers from across Europe. You know, a couple dozen from NGOs. And the UN had about 2 people working who would clock off about midnight, 2 a.m., when most of the people were coming in.
At that time?
So they weren't there. They weren't, you know, helping these people come onto the shore. People were dying of hypothermia. They were giving out, you know, they have stores of blankets. And I used to get in arguments constantly because they had 70 blankets and this was winter. I was there over Christmas and New Year's Eve, and they give out 70 blankets. And there was thousands of people. Most of them had to sleep outside. And people died of hypothermia on the shores of Europe. And at the same time, I'm remembering seeing these adverts of child blankets being advertised on Facebook. Child blankets don't even exist. You know, I mean, they'd be giving out mouldy food. And there was a level of, you know, there was some of the volunteers that would be very patronizing towards the refugees, and there's this level of disrespect which to me, especially from my culture and seeing these people as my own family, was completely uncalled for. It was outrageous to me. You know, these people deserve our utmost respect for what they've gone through, fighting for their lives, fighting to have a better life for their children. And you know, I came back here and things started clicking for me when I realised that, you know, I managed to help some families get through Europe and help some families when I was out there. But for me, it was bigger than the immediate humanitarian situation. And it was about looking at the root cause of this. And that's when I found out about my university, being connected to Israel, being connected to the arms trade. And from then on, I just became very active, mostly in, you know, boycott, divestment campaigns at my university, helping other student groups. Uni? Manchester.
University of Manchester.
Yeah. So I was at University of Manchester at the time.
What were you studying?
Economics.
Straight economics.
Yeah, pretty much. And at that, so I got involved. I set up the BDS campaign, boycott, divestment and sanctions. And I was following, like, you know, maybe naively, probably very naively, I thought, well, I've got a British passport. You know, I'm part of this country. I'm going to get involved in activism and we're going to make a change. And it should be possible, right? Because there'll be so many more people who agree with this, with basic principles. And you know, I kept going with that, and I was involved in local campaigning against banks. I was mainly involved in the kind of boycott, divestment of things, because for me, it was important to do something which I felt like could have a material and tangible impact. You know,
which you've proven has.
Yeah.
Has proven to have affected them in the pocket.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like, because at the time I see people doing like cultural events and giving out kanafa and I just
dabka and all that.
Yeah, dabka and all that, and I just thought, like, even if they like our sweets, doesn't mean they're gonna support our cause for liberation, right? Like, this is a political issue. It's not all about Palestinian culture, and yeah. So eventually, I'd finished uni. I got a job at PSC, Palestine Solidarity Campaign. And there I was in charge of national boycott campaigns.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I was there for a couple of years.
So we're talking 2015, 16?
No. So this is 2018.
2018. So 2015 was basically when you went to the Greek island, you saw some horrific stuff for the first time, came back perhaps with a new or renewed commitment to you and your people and their plight. And then when did you officially join PSC? So I went to Greece in my first year, and I actually went back to Idamini, the border, for 2 months as well during my first year of university. And then 3 years later, I graduated, joined PSC. So I joined Palestine Solidarity Campaign in 2018, pretty much straight away. They had a job opening, I was sent it, you know, and I was a bit, it wasn't an easy decision, you know, because because to join an organisation like that, I'd have to move to London. I would have been out of my immediate community where we were doing a lot of pro-Palestine activism. I knew it would change
it would change how it would look and work, and it's much more formal that way. And, you know, for me, like, whether or not I worked at PSC, doing this type of activism was my 24/7. It was my daily reality at that point. But ultimately, for me, the decision was, you know, it's a calculation of going, well, I can do the kind of stuff we were doing in Manchester, and we were very active on boycott stuff at Manchester, and still are to this day. Manchester's very active on a national level. And these campaigns about, you know, one of the things I wanted to do was set up a database on universities' investments, because a lot of student groups that I was like working with and talking with when I was a student would spend like 6 months a year just trying to find out what the investments were, and like they just go, you know, it recycles every year, so it just needed to be available, this information.
Sure.
So we set up a database on how much universities are investing in what companies, and did similar things for pension funds. I was campaigning for HSBC to divest from Elbit at PSC.
What was the actual role at PSC?
It's called Campaigns Officer.
And did Palestine Action form whilst you were at PSC?
No, so I left PSC in between January and March 2020.
You're on like a 2-year stretch there.
2-year stretch, yeah, roundabout. And Palestine Action formed in July 2020.
COVID time?
Actually, that was the break in COVID. That was because that was after the first 3 months when everyone thought it was over.
Yeah, because March the 23rd, 2020 was when lockdown kicked in.
Yeah.
And they lifted it very briefly towards the end of July.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, no one knew COVID was going to last 2 years.
Yeah.
Probably not the best time to start a movement.
Yeah.
But for us, it was urgent. And actually, at that time, people were mixing and mingling, and you know, and I think part of me, like, you know, I'd done all the stuff at PSA, I'd done all the traditional campaigning stuff, absolutely maxed it out, seeing what I can do and seeing its limitations. And also you get frustrated, right? Because, you know, part of you is like, you know, if we're serious about wanting to achieve liberation for Palestine and wanting to end British complicity, then why are we limiting ourselves to tactics which we know are only going to get results every now and then, and it doesn't match what Israel is doing to Palestine? It doesn't match the level of complicity. And, you know, like, I'd had to, well, at one point, lobby 70 MPs. You know, we have these lobby days.
Yeah.
You know, and you go, oh, would you support the arms embargo? And, you know, these people are so fake and so fickle.
The most fakest people in the land.
And you just realise that it's just not going to happen this way.
How long was that transition then? That kind of like not an ideological, but there's certainly like a methodological difference where like you're thinking, okay, I'm here at PSC, I'm doing what I can as a campaign officer, but we need to do more. This is disproportionate. The disparity between what we're doing and what's actually happening to the Palestinians, it doesn't make sense. Was there a certain period, or was it quite overnightish?
It wasn't overnight. I think I'd always had that deep down. Maybe after the first year or so, I started coming to grips with it and realising the limitations. But you're still trying to do everything you can within your parameters. And then you start to understand more the limitations of, you know, working in an NGO like that. And it was a slow progression, I'd say. But, you know, I had done direct action before I joined PSC. In 2017, I did an action at one of the Elbit factories in Shenstone. So it wasn't something completely out of the blue to me, the idea of direct action. And a similar, I think it was around 2019. And, you know, obviously it's for a completely different cause, different strategies to what Palestine Action has. But Extinction Rebellion was really picking up. And I remember looking at that and going, wow, if we just had a quarter of the people doing that for Palestine, we could change a lot. And so I think seeing that and realising why aren't we, you know, putting our liberty on the line for Palestine? So those things were in my mind. And when I left PSC, it was like, right, the chains are off kind of thing. And, you know, there's other like-minded people that were thinking, you know, along the same lines of we need to do direct action, it needs to be sustained, and, you know, we need to do this properly. And so I think all of these things came together. And
how did it form? Give us like a little
it was
a short story.
How
did Palestine Action form?
So there was a weekend. It's kind of like a Palestine weekend in the middle of nowhere. That happens every now and again, and different types of people, similar ideologies, many of which had done direct action against Elbit. But, you know, these actions were like once a year, once every 6 months. And we kind of came together and said, we need to do this more often. It needs to be sustained and we need to make a real impact. Mm-hmm. And so that was probably just before COVID lockdown. And then it took a few months to really, like, you know, then lockdown happened and we had some online meetings, things like that. And then when we started, you know, we just decided that we were going to go and launch this thing.
Was Richard there from day one?
Richard was there from day one.
Richard's here, by the way. We've kept Sean Bean off the camera.
Yeah.
I think there's a resemblance, by the way, but Richard's here as well. Was he there since day one?
He was there from day one, and actually, I'm sure Richard won't mind me saying it because we've already said it on trial, but you know, Richard, we were like, oh, how do we launch it? What do we do? And he was like, well, let's just do an action every day. I went, oh yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Let's just do an action. And actually, that was like, you know, it was, so Rita started, it was me, Richard, a few others, and we'd go into the London headquarters, mm-hmm. we'd spray paint inside, record it, and then we'd go back and do the same thing, you know, the next week, but we'd get more people so we could go to the 6th floor. And then after that, you know, we decided to call and we didn't get arrested for that. We weren't hiding.
When was your first arrest linked to Palestine Action?
So so it was just after that. So we did about 2-3 weeks of different actions, mm-hmm. and then we weren't hiding, but we just didn't want to wait around to get arrested because we didn't feel like we were doing anything wrong in the grand scheme of things. So we called a public action at 77 Kingsway, and you know, we got there with ladders and we planned to get onto the canopy, mm-hmm. and before it starts the police just come and jump us and arrest us all, and they were grabbing Richard, they were grabbing 2 others, and they weren't grabbing me. So I was like, right, okay, I'm going to get arrested in a minute. So I got a bucket of paint and threw it at the building, and then they threw me on the ground, and then we all got, you know, herded off in the vans. But I remember, like, while we were leaving, we saw like there were like 100 people coming, and this was only a few weeks in, and that was a very exciting moment.
So as you were getting driven away,
yeah,
the cavalry were coming, yeah?
Yeah. The action was started, okay. Just without us. But it was good to see that people were like, you know, people were interested and engaged. And this is just a few weeks in. So that's kind of how it started, yeah.
Now, there'll be some, even within the pro-Palestine camp, Muslim or non-Muslim, they'll even be like, yeah, okay, we're all for Palestine and we're all for solidarity and liberation, but criminal damage and vandalism, you know, that's, it's pushing it a bit too much. And whilst Huda might think that in the grand scheme of things, I've not done anything wrong, in the smaller scheme of things, it is still criminal damage or vandalism of some sort of private property that doesn't belong to you. Well, how would you respond to that critique?
Well, the property we're damaging is property that belongs to an Israeli weapons factory. And so every time we damage it, every time we cost them, we reduce their ability to build weaponry, which is used to massacre Palestinians. And, you know, to me, and I think to most people, what is a window or an air conditioning unit or, you know, a front door or any of this hardware which keeps a factory functioning compared to the value of one life? You can't compare it. It is incomparable. And I think it's important to remember that Elbit is built on the destruction of Palestine. Without the destruction of Palestine, this company wouldn't exist. Their whole business model is on using Gaza as laboratory. They test their weapons out on Palestinians before they sell them on to global regimes. This is one of the reasons they can be successful on a global level. So actually, by destroying them, we are stopping them from profiting from the destruction of Palestine. And so everything they do, that to us, they're a completely illegitimate business. They are engaged in illegal activity on a daily basis. And for us to take direct action to stop them from doing that is the correct thing to do, is the moral thing to do, and arguably, you know, the lawful thing to do. Now, the law might not always see it that way. We may be criminalised by the state. And they may take away our defences to say we are not allowed to argue that we're preventing the greater crime, that we're acting to save lives. These are all principles based on, English law. But either way, we know that that's why we are acting in this way. We are acting to reduce their power, to reduce their ability to profit from the destruction of Palestine. And they are the manifestations of the Zionist entity. They have no place in this country. And if our powers that be cannot take the action necessary to shut them down, then we as people have to do that, using our own bodies sometimes, and by pulling our liberty on the line. And an analogy I use is, if you see a child inside a building and that building is burning down or that child is in danger, would you knock down that door to try and save them? Of course you would.
Of course you would.
Instinctively. You wouldn't care about the value of the door. It has no value. It really has no value in comparison to what's happening to the Palestinian people. And it's no different to breaking down a door to destroy weapons which will be used to harm the people in Palestine.
So, so what you've just explained there, what you just presented there, you believe that kind of dismisses or puts to bed any critiques pertaining to, but you're still breaking the law to get your point across, or you're still breaking the law for your cause. You're saying the cause actually makes the initial action or direct action legitimate.
Yeah, 100%. It's justified. And I think, you have to remember as well, like, the history of movements and, breaking a law when it's criminal damage towards an Israeli weapons factory. And the fact that they are allowed to build these weapons, which are battle tested on Palestinians, they're allowed to supply the Zionist military during a time of a genocide. That is a crime. Them existing here is a crime. And actually, by doing this, I'd argue that we are upholding the law.
How did Elbit become the focus of, because it's pretty much synonymous now with Pal Action, and whenever you hear of Elbit Systems, you know that Pal Action's been active there, probably the only organisation actually that's got things done there. But how did Elbit Systems become the focus?
Yes.
Are they the biggest in terms of the Israeli arms company? Are they the biggest too?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of, one, you hit the nail on the head. They're one of the only Israeli weapons companies. They're the biggest Israeli arms company, and they have a huge presence in this country. And so for us setting up Palestine Action, look, there's many companies you can go after, unfortunately. There are many that are complicit, but it was very clear that Elbit is the worst of the worst.
And
in many cases.
Elbit, just in terms of clarity for our viewers and listeners, it's an Israeli company.
Yeah.
It's not a British company that is selling weapons to Israel. It is an Israeli company.
It's an Israeli company. So all of the UK sites are completely owned by Elbit in Israel. It's Israel's largest weapons manufacturer who are operating here. And also they are a massive part of the apparatus of the Israeli military. So in terms of being able to have the most direct hit on the Israeli military, Elbit is the site to go to. When they are conducting attacks on Palestinians, Elbit will openly say this, that they are not only arming the Israeli military, but they work with them to make sure, during those attacks, to see how the weapons are working, see what tweaks can be done, to see how they're operating, to train them in operating it. So they are really a part of it, and they're doing that right now. There was... They had an annual investor conference just a couple of weeks ago, and they played a video about how the Elbit workers feel like civil soldiers for their participation in the genocide.
Doing their bit for the country, yeah?
Exactly. And actually their workforce in Israel, 15% of them went to join the IDF, went to join the IDF after October 7th. And also how they are engaged during the fighting, doing debriefs of how the weapons are working during the fighting, and the new weaponry that they are now developing during this time in Gaza, using this as an opportunity to test out more weaponry, which we know is their business model. It's how they work. And the CEO said himself that when we have global contracts, so let's say they want a contract with the British Ministry of Defence, they want to know, have it part of their contract, that this has been first used by the IDF and how it's been used. So this is how they are able to gain these contracts worldwide, is by having Gaza.
You are putting yourself at great danger and risk of being arrested, of being criminalized, having a criminal record and so forth. There's this, it could be argued, there's a lot to sacrifice there if you're going to embark on this as a methodology in your fight back against the Zionist entity. Where has that positioned Palestine Action in terms of its relationships with other groups? Where does it find itself with perhaps the more non-direct action, more kind of solidarity campaign movements? I mean, I'm not asking for any specific names, but just generally, how is your relationship with others?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. So there's a lot of local branches of the kind of mainstream NGOs, and amongst local communities and local branches, we have very strong connections, very strong support from those groups. A lot of the time, those local groups on the ground are the ones who are coming out to the police stations to support activists. They're the ones going to court. You know, they do a lot of this kind of background work that maybe isn't seen as directly. Unfortunately, in terms of leadership from those kind of more mainstream organisations, we've had a lot of pushback. And this kind of started from the start of Palestine Action. But, you know, one of our principles at the very start when we started coming across this antagonistic behaviour towards us was we just need to push forward. We need to focus on our actions and let our actions speak for ourselves and not get distracted or brought down or demotivated by this. And I think there's certain parameters which many organisations will work with, and they will always work within those parameters, probably no matter what happens to Palestine, and no matter how.
That's their remit, that's their framing. They're going to stick to that irrespective of what's happening outside.
Yeah, irrespective of all of that. And, you know, for us, we understand that that's where they're going to be. We don't necessarily agree with those tactics as being the main force of the Solidarity Movement. But at the same time, we get on with our direct action. And I think we expect that same respect to just go, you're operating in that space, we're operating in this space. And there doesn't need to be any level of disrespect. I think one of the big issues comes down to strategy and tactics, and maybe some organisations feel challenged by us willing to take direct action, by us taking those routes, because the premise of having to take direct action undermines the more traditional tactics which have been used and recycled and used again and again and again.
So like petitions, lobbying at MPs, even boycotting certain products. These are things which have been tried and tested and will continue to happen, actually. You know, there's always a petition. There is always a joint statement. There will always be solidarity marches.
Yeah.
We will forever be writing to the MPs. Dates to be boycotted, olives to be boycotted.
Exactly.
You know, these things will continue to happen. Are you saying that what Palestine Action is doing is just an addition to, or maybe not a step further, but an addition to the whole cause?
Well, I think it's an addition to it. And I think naturally when you're in a space like this, in any solidarity movement, you're going to have a significant amount who will stick to those tactics, and a certain amount who will maybe realise the drawbacks of sticking to those tactics and the limitations, and will take it upon themselves to step up and take direct action. So I think that's natural within a movement. But I think as well but with Palestine, it is unique in many cases to other social justice issues. And I think sometimes, you know, when there's a bombing or something happens in Gaza, talking before October 7th, we see the same things happening over and over again. And I think there's a duty to be honest and understand what has worked and what hasn't worked. You know, like, for example, in 2021, we had the big march in London. we had the mass lobbying of politicians. We had 500,000 people sign a petition for sanctions.
Yeah.
How many people have we had marching through the streets these past 6 months? How many
Million,
politicians?
500,000, 250,000, 750,000 more, yeah.
And we've never, you know, through the legitimate means of what we're meant to believe, you know, these establishments and institutions that many people will have faith in, like the International Court of Justice. Yeah, the fact that they've ruled it's plausible they're committing genocide can help, but has that changed the British government stance? Have any of these things, and I don't think we've ever had a stronger legal argument and an argument to bring to government and bring to the politicians that they should not be supporting this, yet still they do. So it's not going to take maybe another 50,000 people on the streets. It's not going to take more people lobbying those MPs. If they're Zionists and they take a Zionist stance.
What about 50,000 people joining Palestine Action?
Well, we'd shut down every single weapons factory, without a doubt. You know, we shut down 50 people got arrested to shut down permanently the factory in Oldham.
Yeah.
We shut down the factory in Tamworth. That was just a month ago. Yeah. I haven't counted how many, but probably around the same number, 50 people. I mean, we're talking about people dismantle the factory, and there's different levels as well. I think it's good for people to understand that when you take direct action, yeah, you do have the people who go on top of the roofs, who smash the buildings up, who go inside, destroy those weapons, and you have the people who lie down in front of the factories and still shut the factory down for a day. Different repercussions, different risks. So there is, you know, a place even for those who are more cautious about the repercussions to take these type of actions. For us, the key thing is it has to be disruptive. And if we were taking direct action, if we had 50,000 people, Elbit would be gone. You know, 2-3 months maximum, they would be gone.
If that many people joined or embarked on direct action for PA. Yeah,
we probably only need a tenth of that. Probably even less than that, a 20th of that to shut down Elbit for good. You'd want to stop BAE sending arms to Israel? Well, you know, 1,000 would do it. Maximum, I'd say. And this is the potential I'm saying. You know, we've seen people shut down a weapons factory with 2 people. People a couple of weeks ago, 4 people went on the roof of Teledyne, an American weapons factory in Shipley, who are one of the largest exporters of arms to Israel. They took the roof apart from that factory. So there's 4 people, you know, and they are taking on a huge personal risk to themselves, but they're doing it knowing that by doing this, I'm having a real tangible impact on this factory. And I think that just shows the power of direct action.
In terms of your personal observations of PA groups in different parts of the country, how's your interaction and relationship been with local Muslim communities?
Brilliant. I mean, I'll give you an example. Leicester. Love the Leicester community. You know, when in 2021, during the bombing, 4 people from Palestine Action went onto the roof of Elbit in Leicester. Hundreds are coming out, hundreds from the community. They were there for 6 days on the roof, and the police, after 3 days, they ran out of water, and the police wouldn't give them any water. So people from the local community were throwing up bottles of water, getting arrested for throwing up bottles of water, but they'd still do it to get them the water on the roof. After 6 days, the police went in to try and arrest them, and hundreds came out from the community, you know, and they put their cars in the way of the gate to stop the police from being able to arrest them. They were chaining up the gate. Like, that was really an example of how those people on the roof took direct action, but so did that local community. It took them 8 hours to arrest them after 6 days because of how much of a fight the community put up. And then when they got to the police station, when they were driving them off, 30 cars were following them. And this was majority from the local Muslim community. And it was incredible to see such strength in a community. And we've seen this across different places, you know, in different areas. Bradford, a huge amount of Muslims came out to support those activists getting involved in the campaign. You know, we spoke in Bradford, your hometown.
Yes.
Hundreds of people came out.
They did.
You know, it wasn't even advertised, like, it wasn't publicly advertised. It's just, these are how strong those communities are. And I think the power of the Muslim community as well is that they're very tight-knit. So when you've got a few people down, suddenly it's 100, suddenly it's 1,000, suddenly everyone knows and they're out there supporting. So it's they have an incredible amount of power, and when it's harnessed in this type of direction, there's a huge strength in the Muslim community.
With the nature of direct action and with the nature of how directly and how often you're going to come into loggerheads or running with the authorities, has it ever passed your mind that the organization could be infiltrated or there could be agitators? I mean, if mosques up and down the country and Islamic organizations, whether they are missionary or humanitarian or media, that's a conversation that's very common, right?
Yeah.
To think that your movement or group or your community has been infiltrated is actually a matter of fact. Do you ever wonder about this?
Yeah, I mean, when we started Palestine Action, we weren't naive to think that, okay, they're going to try and infiltrate us. They'll do everything to try and shut you down and stop you. And I think there's different ways that infiltrators will try and bring down a movement. One can be to like make it super liberal and take it away from its core principles of direct action. And one can be to take it completely the other way. And other strategies like compromise and actions.
So what type of direct action do you think would be unacceptable that may taint the group?
To be honest, I don't think, for us,
can I ask you some
we don't
examples?
principally have limitations.
Okay.
But what I would say is it's about being strategic.
Okay.
And I think that's the key thing. Because, if you were to blow somewhere up or burn somewhere down, people need to be aware that you're going to face serious time for that kind of stuff. So I think something Palestine Action does well is kind of play this line of we're taking super radical action, but we're not taking to a point where we're going to be completely cracked down on. And that's one of our principles of direct action, is about the dilemma with the state. Yes, they're going to crack down on us, but when you go so far to that place, you're completely shut down. You can't operate. You're labelled a terrorist organisation.
Yes.
Everyone's in prison.
Yeah.
You're not able to do it. So it's about being strategic.
Sure. Have you ever experienced, without getting into details, people that sounded like they were a bit booky, a bit, could be undercovers, could be agitators? Did you ever get anything, hear anything, observe anything yourself throughout the years?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been instances where we've had suspicions. The thing is with these things is you can never go 100% that person's an undercover, 100% that person's an informer. But at the same time, the way we operate is, we don't need to let absolutely everyone in. It's not just like open to absolutely everyone, including the cops, come and join our movement and shut us down and take us away from our goals. So, for us, we do have a strong vetting procedure. We've always had that in place. And also, I think you can never go 100%. We can completely exclude that risk, but you can mitigate it as much as possible. And that's what we try and do. So we do have vetting procedures. And I think the way we operate, in the sense that it's normally groups of people taking these types of actions, you end up isolating a risk. So if by some chance someone gets into one group, then the other groups are protected from that. And often we have cells, and those cells are close-knit people, need-to-know basis is how we operate. And so we implement security procedures within the movement to try and keep people as safe as possible. And, of course, the main thing is to be able to do what we're doing without being shut down or torn apart by bad faith actors. And as well, we know that Elbit have it out for us. Cops have it out for us. So and the new risk now really is undercover journalists. Coming into movements, because what do? They're cops and they get out in the media. They're state agents. So you had to put measures in place and have strong vetting procedures and mitigate it as much as possible.
Are many of your people that are embarking on direct action, they are getting arrested at the very least, right?
Yeah, so many of our actions are accountable. So let's say you're going to occupy a factory. You're going to get on the roof. You're going to stay there for as long as possible because that's part of the occupation. If you get on the roof of a factory and you've got a hammer, you can do a lot of damage to that factory before you're arrested because you're an advantage point where you can be there for a longer amount of time. You have to be prepared then to get arrested, go to court, etc. And the same with a lock-on. There's no point if you're locking on and blocking a gate, you're not going to get away, right? Because the point is to stay there for as long as possible, to shut it down for as long as possible. But at the same time, there are many actions that people do where they're not caught, and they do get away. So there's a range in Palestine Action.
The Elbit 8. Tell us a bit about that. It was quite a prominent court case. Tell us a bit about that. Who were the Elbit 8? What was the court case?
Yeah, so the Elbit 8 was myself, Richard, and about 6 others. And we were on trial from November for 6 weeks. I think it ended up being 7 weeks or something in the end. And basically, we were being trialed for most of the actions that happened within the first 6 months of Palestine Action. So some that I talked about, we also did a rooftop occupation where we dismantled the factory in Shenstone, and other things around that nature. And on top of that, 3 of us, myself, Richard, and Emily, were charged with blackmail, which was quite a serious charge, and it was a bit ridiculous, to be honest. In the end...
Who were you guys supposedly to have blackmailed?
So supposedly we blackmailed the landlords of Elbit by telling them to evict Elbit and throwing red paint over them.
Okay.
But I mean, to be honest with you, like when you compare it to other movements, this whole blackmail thing is it's a bit of a madness. Yeah. But we were ready to fight it anyway. But in the end, we had 13 different charges. I can't even remember all of them. I think I had 11 charges. Richard had a similar amount. And we were there for 6 weeks during the peak of the genocide. So, we all got up there, spoke our truth, explained what Elbit did, explained why we did it, explained why we don't believe we are criminal in any way, why we're pleading not guilty. And in the end, we were found not guilty on a significant number of charges. The jury were undecided on some. And, the prosecution have now gone, you're going to have a retrial, so we get to go again in a year.
So we're at the stage of a retrial.
Yeah. So we're going to have another trial in May next year.
That's serious.
Which is, yes, to a certain degree, but also with a jury, you've got normal people sitting there.
Yeah, and hopefully they can be convinced.
Exactly. And we didn't have an all-white jury. When you see some Arab Muslim faces on there, then you start to feel a bit more confident. So we're going to go again. But I think it's one of those things like I'm not going to complain about having a retrial. It becomes part of your life. You get to go again. I'll tell you something interesting that happened in the trial. So there was a guy called Ofer Maisha, and he's from Elbit, Israel. And he gave a statement to the prosecution. And if you give a statement for the prosecution, defense is allowed to call them in to be cross-examined.
Of course.
And so we said, well, bring this guy, Ofer, into court. And the prosecution were putting up a fight saying he can't because Israel's in a state of emergency, can't get on a flight, can't get internet. And in the end, the Israeli government wrote a letter to the judge explaining that he's playing a key role in the Israeli government during their military campaign in Gaza right now. And that's why he couldn't come to the trial.
That's literally, like Elbit Systems is literally a part of the Zionist machine.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so any idea when this retrial is going to be?
So I think it's set for May 2025.
May 2025, okay. So just over a year.
Yeah.
Do you think other Palestine solidarity groups, movements, Muslim, non-Muslim, have been compromised? Have been infiltrated? Have been compromised?
It's hard to say, because I think it's the same for us. You can never say 100%.
Without mentioning it, did you ever get a vibe of some?
What I would say is that compromise can be different things, right? So yes, they could be infiltrated by Zionists, but you can be compromised in different ways. So if you've got senior trade unionists, major trade unions on your board and who are giving you most of your donations, and we saw Unite just a couple of weeks ago, maybe this week, come out and say that the Unite leader, that they will always put jobs in the defence sector above fighting the Gaza genocide.
Yep.
And, you know, they pass motions, these unions, and they go, oh, we should have a two-way arms embargo. Well, you're the guys with the workers making these weapons, right? Oh, we support BDS, but they do nothing towards it. It's all talk. And, you know, they've come out against groups like ours for taking these types of actions. And when you have those on the board of major Palestine organisations, then to a degree they are compromised because the priorities change. They are having to deal with other people's interests. They're having to deal with other you know, groups whose main interest isn't Palestine, and they've got to prioritise those to a certain degree over the Palestine struggle. So to a certain degree, you can see that it's not hidden. There is a level of being compromised in there. You know, there's also a level of wanting to continue to appeal to Labour, wanting to continue to this respectability politics, right? Doesn't matter how respectable you look or you act. If you're acting for Palestine, they're not going to treat you respectably. When you're still going in, still giving Labour politicians a platform for what some hope that they're going to return the favour, they will not.
Do you think Muslims will punish Labour this coming general election? That's generally the word on the street. Do you think they will?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think that's obvious now. I mean, you know, I think before October 7th, it should have been obvious. But
sometimes it takes these instances.
It takes these instances for people to realise and to see how, you know, how can you vote for Zionists?
The Lord Balfour painting in Cambridge, was that one of yours?
One of our paintings?
Yeah. No, not one of your paintings. Come on, one of your people that did that.
Yeah, that was in Palestine Action. Yeah,
that was pretty big.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it was.
Was that an original painting as well? That was right.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, GB News were on it.
But
GB News were screwing.
But
God,
it's funny though, isn't it? Because no one knows these paintings exist, do they?
Yeah, wow.
No one cares about it. It's a vanity project. You know, it was in the University of Cambridge because he went there. But I think, you know, for us, we're very focused on the arms trade.
So what happened to her then? As an example, she went one of the, you know, prestigious places of academia in the Western world. Here is a massive painting of an old British colonialist who literally handwritten a underhand deal with the Zionists to give them a part of Palestine, and she went and did what she did. What was the repercussions for her?
She's not been arrested.
She's not been arrested?
No.
How?
She just didn't get arrested. She walked out and got away with it, essentially. For now, we'll see. But, you know, it's one of those things where some actions people are prepared to get arrested.
Okay.
But if it happens, but they're not necessarily going to wait around and get arrested for the sake of getting arrested. The point was the action.
Was she a student?
I don't know.
Okay, fine.
But they did arrest someone, and it was quite funny to a certain degree, because they arrested someone who did an action against the Balfour statue in the House of Commons in 2022.
Okay.
And she actually got found not guilty at Crown Court, and they arrested her just because they thought she
was linked to the painting incident.
Because she'd done a Balfour action, so she must have done another Balfour action.
Okay.
And she wasn't even in the country at the time.
Can you imagine? That's the thing now, Balfour Action, and Elbit Actions,
Yeah,
BAE Action.
Yeah.
What other actions do you have?
Well, those are the main actions, to be honest. I think, you know, for us, we are predominantly about direct action against the Israeli weapons trade, but Balfour is an important symbol to target, especially in this country. You know, like, that's when British colonialism, that's the root of Britain's story in colonising Palestine. That is the root to the Palestinian story today. And the fact that, and that's the root to why Elbit exists here today. So I think doing those kind of actions now and again to make a point and to make people aware of these things, because, and actually, you know, there was a lot of chat about it. It was trending for 3 days. But a lot of people started looking at Palestine from before, not from where it is today, and not looking at the solution from where it is today, but realising that the whole premise of giving away Palestine was wrong, that actually these things are quite new. And, you know, every Palestinian will know the story of Balfour. But a lot of British people had no idea. But actually, I think that's changed after that action, and people realise that this isn't just some two-sided thing. This is a story about colonialism, and Britain's at the heart of it. And I think when people know that in this country, it also heightens their sense of responsibility to correcting what they did.
Most recently, there was a collab you did with Youth Demand at Ministry of Defence.
Yeah.
Where they got sprayed up. Tell us a bit about Youth Demand. Have just recently come into the scene. I've recently just heard of them. What are they about?
So Youth Demand are, I think they were predominantly environmental activists.
Okay.
But they're now getting, and I think this is a sign of what's happening now, actually. A lot of groups and individuals are taking up the Palestine struggle and see it as crucial, as a crucial struggle in this country to fight for. So they're relatively new. And we had talked with them as Palestine Action. They wanted to have a demand about Palestine. You know, and we discussed about the two-way arms embargo and the importance of having an actual concrete demand rather than just saying ceasefire now, but calling for sanctions. And so on that, we kind of matched up in the sense of Ministry of Defence made sense for us. They're one of the biggest buyers of weapons from Elbit factories in this country. And, you know, they've been training the Israeli military. In this country, Israeli military been trained since October 7th. We've also had, you know, 9 Israeli military aircrafts land in this country. And now we know that, you know, Ministry of Defence was it just yesterday?
Yeah, shooting 9 Iranian
protecting the Zionist regime. Imagine if they shot down Israeli fighter jets before they got to Gaza.
Labour headquarters, was that Youth Demand as well?
Yeah, that was Youth Demand. That wasn't.
So what do you think of that? Do you think that's taking a step too far, or do you think politicians, headquarters, or even individual MPs, what do you think? A bit too much? A bit excessive?
No, I don't think too much. It's red paint at the end of the day. These people are calling for food and water to be cut off. They're working with the Zionists. You know, they're embodying themselves with Zionist lobby groups. And they're the potential future government of this country. Mm-hmm. Are they going to do a thing for Palestine? No. And I think it's right, you know, especially the Labour Party, you know, it's meant to stand for these types of issues, and they're complicit in genocide. It's genocide happening right now. And, you know, if people are more shocked by some red paint at a Labour headquarters, you know, imagine being in Gaza. Mm. So I don't think it's too far. But at the same time, like, it's not our strategy. But you have to have some level of respect that they are putting the two-way arms embargo as a key demand, and they're getting arrested in order to bring that demand to the forefront.
Bringing the podcast to a close, I asked you this also before we started filming, in that your involvement with and as co-founding Palestine Action, as well as your previous experience at PSC, and, you know, just coming from a certain spectrum of the pro-Palestine movement, because the pro-Palestine movement is so broad, right? If you just take the UK, for example, Muslims would like to see that we dominate that space, whether it be demographically, financially, wherever it may be. But there isn't. You've got socialists, you've got many left-leaning groups, you've got Queers for Palestine, you've got Pal Action, you've got PSC, you've got BDS, you've got Friends of Al-Aqsa, you've got even different groups and movements within these different factions, and there's lots. It's a big spectrum, right? But I asked you, you know, as an Iraqi, as a Palestinian, when you hear the words and the actions and the output of the Muslim community, most of whom in the UK are not Palestinian, most of whom are not Arab, right? 60 to 62% of all Muslims in the UK are from South Asia. Yeah. They're Pakistani, Bengalis or Gujarati Indians, right? Yet it is they who are raising the most amount of sadaqah and, you know, fundraising efforts. It is they who are opening up the institutions for events to take place. You spoke up my local Islamic centre when you and Richard came down, Kareem came down. That Islamic centre is ultimately owned by my local masjid. So these kind of efforts, but the language is very different to, let's say, a socialist.
Yeah.
the language is very different to that of someone who's left-leaning. You will hear things like Nusra, you will hear things like Jihad fi Sabilillah, you'll hear Shuhada, but not just martyrs but actual meaning of a martyr in their kind of Islamic Arab kind of conscious is one who's gone in a much higher status in the Akhirah, right? The references to Al-Aqsa, the third holiest site in Islam, what it means from Muslims from Indonesia to Morocco to Somalia to Dagestan, right? Does any of that resonate with you? In terms of like your years, you've been active since 2015.
Yeah.
You've seen space. You've seen the space. You've worked with many non-Muslims in this space, right? But when you hear these sentiments, this language, this angle, does it resonate with you at all?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I come from, I am Muslim. I grew up in a Muslim family, and I grew up in communities full of Pakistani, Indian Muslims, Bangladeshis as well. So for me, this is, this becomes an embodiment of the cause. It is a part of it. For me, Palestine is deeply personal on every level. I will spend the rest of my life fighting for a free Palestine. I hope it won't take that long,
Inshallah.
But when I see other people taking up this cause with whatever motivation, that we need to be working together towards that common goal. And that's something that we have in Palestine Action, is we are not precious about what different ideology or what motivates you necessarily, as long as we're on the same page when it comes to Palestinian liberation, and we can work together towards shutting down this company. Then come on board, because together we are extremely powerful force to be reckoned with.
What does Palestine liberation look like for you?
Palestine liberation looks like for me is that Palestinians have the right to self-determination in and of their own land, that they are free from occupation, that they are allowed to thrive in their own homeland, allowed to return to their own homelands, free from oppression, free from Western imperialism, just free to be in their land.
What to do with an army?
With an army?
Yeah, a Palestinian state with an army.
Well, I think it's going to be necessary, isn't it? We live in a world where if everyone.
No, I'm saying that because that's on the lips of some even though a Palestinian state can't foresee it having an army, and I think I've heard it from politicians. I mean, it's Israel's new thing now. They've scrapped the two-state solution because any state solution which involves Palestine having an army is not something that's even foreseeable or plausible that they were willing to entertain. So your free Palestine, my free Palestine would have an army. Would your free Palestine have an army?
Yeah, because we live in a world. Look, at the end of the day, if you want to demilitarize the world and the Western imperialists put down all their armies and they get rid of all their armies and all of the threats to the Arab world and to the people who've been colonized and who've been oppressed and who were targets for imperialism, if that doesn't exist, no need for an army. But as long as that still exists, Palestinians have the right to be able to defend themselves. Any oppressed people do. Any people who are targets of that type of imperialism have the right to be able to defend themselves. And that's why it's necessary. Not because Palestinians are interested in being able to, oppress other countries or other lands, but because that threat comes to them, because of what's happened over the past 75, 76 years. But as well, I feel like when Palestine is free, that will be a massive blow to Western imperialism and could change the face of how things look. But, we'll see where we are when we get to that point. But I think a liberated Palestine will have huge, will be like an earthquake across the world in terms of changing how politics looks like, how geopolitics looks like.
Do you think Israel's eventual and inevitable demise, the occupying apartheid colonial settler entity of Israel, do you think its downfall and demise, that apparatus, that embodiment, that polity there, do you think its demise is intrinsically linked to the decline of the US as a global superpower? Or do you think they're two separate things? Do you think there can be a time where Israel, as we know it today, no longer exists, is no longer able to occupy and implement apartheid in the breadth of historic Palestine, without America taking a hit in the global arena?
It either requires the US to have its own demise in terms of being a global superpower, or for the US to give up on supporting Israel. And, you know, it's not impossible to see that. I think it's a pain in the neck for many Western countries.
Yeah.
And they're almost stuck in this thing of having to constantly support Zionism and support it. And will they do that to their own demise? Probably not.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're getting closer and closer to that. So I think it's one of the two. Either they cut them off and, you know, Palestinians do the rest of the job, or the US goes down with Israel.
My final question to you, you know, you're half Palestinian, you're half Iraqi, yet you said not too long ago that, you know, this is a cause that you'll be committed to till your whole life. How does the two Gulf Wars in Iraq and Iraq's own history, in fact, you know, it could even be argued, you know, the colonization of Iraq and the colonization of Palestine after World War I, it's intrinsically the same historical period.
Yeah.
You're still talking about that very post-Ottoman World War I defeat period, right?
Yeah.
Sykes-Picot, they are pretty much linked.
Yeah.
How does events in Iraq differ to events in Palestine for you personally, being both of that heritage?
I think, you know, even for Iraqis, Palestine is hugely, you know, it's a hugely important issue in the Middle East. It's not the most important. The Zionist entity in the Middle East is a threat to all of the Arab countries, and it's in the same set of you know, the imperialist machine, which was intrinsic in destroying Iraq, and actually having Palestine liberated from the Zionist occupation, liberated from Western imperialism, will have a huge change to the whole region. And it's the same forces, essentially, that were responsible for the destruction of Iraq. And, you know, I think for Iraqis, people in Lebanon, people in many of the Arabic countries, they see Palestine as the heart of their struggle. And many are willing to risk their freedom and their safety within those countries in order to act in solidarity with the Palestinians. And I think for me, seeing what happened in Iraq, you know, and what happened to my family, and the consequences of that, and the trauma of what's happening to them, and knowing that Britain, it's the same hands that are responsible. The British imperialism went in to invade Iraq in 2003. Britain, someone who signed away the land of Palestine, is the same colonizers who are behind it. And I think Palestine is hugely, is the center of the struggle against imperialism.
Where does that put people like yourself, myself, and Muslims and people of color of various stripes and leanings, in that if they see naturally, inevitably, understandably, that the country of their birth, its establishment, its political infrastructure, its institutions was hands dripping knee deep in the blood of our ancestors. And we're not talking 1,000 years ago. We're not talking 500 years ago. We're not even talking 250 years ago. We're talking 100 years ago. Whether you talk about the British Raj in India, or whether you talk about Sykes-Picot in the Arab Muslim world. You know, there'll still be people watching this podcast, and I'm sure Islamophobes and Zionists, you know, once they know you've been on the show, they're going to watch this start to end attentively. And they'll conclude that neither Huda or Dilly can truly be a part of British society, because ultimately they are a fifth column and they're an enemy within. Because whilst this could be their country of their birth, and they may have a football team that they support, and they may like fish and chips, and their banter, their accent is undeniably British, and they have British friends, and they have British family members, and so forth. Ultimately, they freaking see the great and glory of this country, its rich heritage, which we celebrate from the rooftops, whether it be Victory Day, whether it be Remembrance Day, whether it may be whatever it may be, right? these guys have a completely different outlook towards the countries of their birth, and we're freaking talking third and fourth gen now. We're not even talking about their forefathers who came here as migrants.
Yeah.
What would your response be to those who see non-white pro-Palestine campaigners and activists, whether it's from a Muslim perspective or from a POC perspective? These people, their loyalty is not to this country.
Well, first of all, we're a part of the society, whether they like it or not. And there are many of us, and there are many people who are against colonialism in the society. You know, that we always hear post-colonial theory and all of these terms when actually still going on today. And that's what we're fighting against, is the fact that it has continued to this very day. And second of all, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that colonialism in the first place. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword for them, isn't it?
It's true. You know what I actually think about that? My father came here in '66 with his paternal uncle. They came as economic migrants, right? They were invited here to rebuild cheap labour, right? You know, me old subjects from me old colonies. They came over because there was a shortage in the labour force. What was the context of your forefathers coming to the UK?
So it was my parents, and they studied medicine in Iraq, and so my dad managed to get a visa because they needed doctors in this country. So it was similar. And actually there was a wave of Arabs who came around that time. And you know, for my family, they always thought they'd go back.
Same.
But
they never actually came here in the 60s. They never really came here to permanently settle.
No, but you know, there were wars going on, and it wasn't safe to go back. And I remember, actually, I was remembering this the other day, you know, when the British National Party started coming up and being a thing, just completely rattled my family. You know, the sense of like how unwanted you were in this country, and you know, they considered going back. But you know, we're here.
Do you consider Britain home?
Well, it's where I grew up. This is where I live. This is my home. But I think one of the things when you come from somewhere like our backgrounds is that you don't really you feel like you could be anywhere. Yeah. Because you're not where you're not in your ancestral lands. Yeah. You know what I mean? So there's no real attachment.
True.
It's not.
I mean, look, when we go to Bangladesh, Pakistan, it's very common to be seen as a Brit.
Yeah.
Or a Westerner. You're as good as white, except that you're not, and that your motherland is that. And of course, here we're always constantly reminded of how grateful we should be, how thankful we should be. Yeah. You know, how much loyalty and allegiance we should be committing unquestionably, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you never kind of ever feel at home. It actually reminds me of a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He goes, live this life as if you're a wayfarer, as if you're a traveller. In fact, for insan, my dear sister, I don't think there's anywhere where we can always feel permanently at home, especially when our people are going through what they're going through as we speak. Yeah. Huda, it was an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, honestly. And hopefully we might have Richard on a future episode. He might grow a beard by that time. Brothers and sisters, I hope you all enjoyed today's podcast as much as I did. Please do check out Palestine Action. Most of their Twitter tags is PAL_action, right? Yeah. So brothers and sisters, please do get involved, research more into Pal Action. If you like this episode, do remember to click subscribe. You can find it on all the major audio platforms. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.